So today I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Terry Snyder, the Vice President of Creative at Blender's Eyewear. With over 20 years of experience shaping the visual storytelling of some of the biggest brands in the action sports and action lifestyle space, including Nixon, DC Shoes, and Etnies, Terry has been on the forefront of creative innovation, redefining how brands connect with their athletes and audiences. Blender's Eyewear has taken the industry by storm, disrupting a competitive space traditionally dominated by legacy brands. Under Terry's creative leadership, Blenders has redefined what it means to be an eyewear brand in today's fast-moving digital landscape, blending authenticity with athlete-driven storytelling and bold designs that create a brand that stands out in a crowded marketplace. We're about to deep dive into Terry's creative journey, the challenges of brand building in a rapidly evolving space, and discover what the future holds for storytelling in action sports and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Terry Snyder to Creativity Flow.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
So we had the unique opportunity to get to know each other a little bit prior to this, and your background and your journey is reflective of some of the guests that we've had previously, but you've really kind of leaned into the strengths of what you saw within brand development over the period of that career, and we're going to get into that tonight. So you've had an incredible journey working across multiple brands in action sports, lifestyle, and now eyewear. So I'm curious, take us back to the beginning and what sparked your passion for design and then ultimately creative marketing.
Yeah, I think there were several sparks. I don't think there was just one. I was a kid that just genuinely loved advertising. And when I say a kid, I was, tiny, memorizing commercials and jingles and all this stuff. Like just as much as like music, I found advertising very, very, I don't know, just fun. And so I think I had that kind of direction before I even knew it as a spark for a career because I was just a kid being a kid. Then I think, discovering um, sports, more specifically, skateboarding, I think it was like it brought creativity like right into your room. It was like, it didn't feel distant. It felt like, something you could touch. It was being created by people that felt like they were like you. It just felt tangible. It felt, that DIY, that very like hands-on approach, I feel like gave me an idea that some of this stuff was possible and learnable. So I think that was kind of the next step. And then ultimately, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went off to school. I mean, many of you that are, here, you're in an amazing art school. This place is incredible. Everybody that I've talked to is just amazing. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to a guidance counselor that said, well, you're good at art and you're good at math. You should be an architect. And so I was fortunate enough to get into a good architecture school. I went off and it was just like, I don't know, my head exploded. It was like, I can do this, but I'm not enjoying this. So kind of reset my life for many reasons. Fell in love with my then girlfriend, now wife. She's sitting there. Um, but I just kind of reset myself and found photography as a spark. And so there was another little spark of just doing that. But again, it wasn't career minded. Fast forward to finding an art school finally that was like very advertising centric. And I just got so curious about everything. I wanted to know how everything worked. Like I would want to know how, the billboard got up there, how the printer worked, that made the billboard, how the everything worked. I just wanted to know how it all worked. And so I finally had people to sit there and unpack that for me. And I just kind of kept going and kept going and kept going. And so I think it was just kind of this curiosity that was the spark. And then opportunity after that. So yeah, that's
So you had mentioned to me how, you went to an art school that was very focused on preparing you for life in an agency.
yeah.
And you were very much looking at kind of your life going in one of two directions, right? The footwear was going to be different in each space. One was going to be probably very suit and tie, and the other one was going to be completely driven by the culture that you came up in. What ultimately led you down the track that took you to DC Shoes?
I mean, that track was like, I mean, there's your graduation day, and you're like, okay, that's coming. I need to kind of hit the pavement, network, things like that. And so my networking went two ways. And it was like, okay, advertising agencies, who do I know? Who can I talk to? Showing up, interviewing, asking for internships. There were also like, I think back some of these random startups that I was like interviewing at and things like that. But then my passion that I had been pursuing while I was in art school was, very much in skateboarding and surf. But I was doing that like in between school hours. So like hearing from like your staff that you guys are like have action sports like as an option woven into your schooling is incredible. I was doing that like, in my off hours, just trying to figure out how does a board get screen printed and how does the design that I make go from here to there to there to there. So I worked that angle too, going to the action sports retailer trade show. They made a catalog, and at the back was just all the addresses, all the phone numbers for all the brands. And so I looked at every brand that I was remotely interested in that was, you know, within an hour or two of me. And I just started just hitting them and just, meeting people and shaking hands. And I met a guy at DC Shoes at the trade show booth, Steve Sias, and he liked my work and he passed it to, let's see, he passed it to this guy, Ken Block, and a guy named Carl Heineman. And but ultimately, you know, Ken gave the stamp and said, you know, let's hire him, entry level graphic designer. So I just had an opportunity. Some people here might know him as that guy, but when I first met him, he was this guy. Um, but that's kind of another story. Uh,
He's a legend.
yeah,
And by the way, way to bring both speakers into one photograph tonight. I mean, that's
yeah. No, you got. Well, yeah, it's crazy. So like, me and one of my designers, Dan Jansen, we worked on that car livery, and then, yeah, of course, the monster side of it with John, yeah. There you go.
that's
Yeah.
incredible. So I want to delve into kind of how those early experiences shaped your approach to branding and storytelling as you moved ahead. But your first project at DC was very formative in the way that you approached the rest of your career.
Yep.
Can you tell everyone a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, I kinda just got, like I got in there and did a little bit of everything. But then, the brand was going through, I mean, I didn't know this at the time, but they were going through a time where they were looking to sell the brand. I thought they just needed somebody to design a coffee table book, but what they were basically doing was putting together a whole portfolio for the brand. So, Ken pointed at me and said, "You're the guy. You're gonna put together the coffee table book." He put me in an office right next to his, and I basically lived in that office for like a year. And it was a crash course in a lot of different things. I mean, you might look at it and say, okay, it's just a book, but it involved every single athlete that they were involved with, curating every single photo. So it contacted me to every magazine, every photographer in the industry, and the top athletes across skateboarding, surfing, snowboarding, and art, culture, music, all in one thing. And all these people were very hands on too. So, I got to know them very well.
Pretty incredible to be 25 and working with the A-list action sports athletes of the era.
Pretty surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you started DC Shoes, you moved to Nixon eventually, kind of, and I'm jumping a number of opportunities in between. But can you tell me how that story arc shaped your approach that ultimately got you into this athlete-led process of storytelling?
Yeah. So, I mean, I also have to give kind of a shout out to another one of my mentors, Chris Miller. I mean, because like where Ken was this kind of mastermind from a marketing and brand building standpoint. I think, Chris, who at the time, he hired me at Planet Earth Clothing and gave me a shot being the art director there. He was very much like, it was like working for the ultimate designer that also had this amazing business sense too. So there was kind of like this 1-2 kind of mentorship that I had back and forth between them. I mean, Chris went on to co-found Viore, and do amazing things. So it's like I was just very blessed and fortunate to have these two guys give me a shot within the 5-6 year period. of time. Um, but yeah, and then there's Chris too. So that was the guy that I looked up to on, my whole youth, and then I was like working for him. So but yeah, I mean, as far as like my approach goes, by the time I landed at Nixon, it was like um I had worked for I'm skipping over some, but I'm gonna get back to them in a little bit. One of them's in the crowd here.
No
But,
pressure.
but by the time I got to Nixon, it was like, um, I had worked amongst a whole array of very inspiring athletes, and it was more than just athletes. I mean, it was definitely, it was a culture that was like, I felt like we were running parallel paths doing different things. You had the athletes pushing their side of doing all these things that had never been done before. And then you had the art department and the creative department basically doing the same. I mean, it was, we were, there were no rules, but at the same time, there were a ton of rules within this landscape of skate culture. So it was just it was kind of this, beautiful playground of what's possible both in sport but also in creativity.
Yeah.
So yeah, by the time I landed here, it was like, I had been inspired by the athletes, and I think I'd really been trained up as a designer at that point. But now it was time to like really get much more hands on, both with athletes, with a camera in my hand, being out in the world, get out from behind the computer and like go do a lot of things. So
And one of the things that you'd mentioned to me was the human or humanizing the icon, right? In order to make the athlete relatable to the consumer. People are in awe of the talent of these people,
yeah.
but they're people, at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I think, getting the opportunity to work with someone like, like this image is Bruce Irons here, getting to work with someone that is this elite level athlete, but then figure out like, okay, what what would be the more like vulnerable side of them? I mean, everybody knows like at the time you'd open up a magazine or watch one of their videos and it was like it was undisputable, like, their talent of what they do primarily, but then, being at a place like Nixon, it was like, "Let's go a layer deeper, let's connect with them, let's see, like, what are the ordinary things about them, but then also what are the quirky things about them, what makes them them?" And so I think, I had an opportunity through a lot of different projects there to really, like, challenge myself not to show the obvious, get to know people, do something really creative with them, and then in turn, have them be really stoked on what you're doing. I think in the end too, it was like, "Hey, just trust, earn trust. Don't worry, we're gonna make you look great." Yeah.
Now, speaking of trust, I want to kind of talk about authenticity, right? So Nixon is very interesting because Nixon was born out of skateboard culture, but it does not associate itself overtly with, the sport in essence. Like I know that, everyone knows that like Nixon comes out of it, but the way that they market necessarily, it's not always a skateboarder wearing a Nixon watch. The brand kind of carried itself into that space. But I'm curious, so a lot of these brands, they live and die by their authenticity. How do you stay true to your roots over time as you grow without distancing yourself from the essence of what made you great?
Yeah, I mean, authenticity is like, I mean, I think everybody after they say the word authenticity now has to say it's an overused word, so I'm gonna say authenticity is used a lot, but it's probably describes what you're talking about the best because, brands like, working for etnies. So I went to work for etnies and it was like, working for Pierre Andre and then Don Brown in attendance. Everybody, look at this crazy guy right there. That's him on the freeway. He came in one day and said, "Hey guys, I might not see you tomorrow because I might be in jail. I'm going on the freeway." And I was just like, it's Don being Don. And yeah, he went and skateboarded on the freeway. But the the level of authenticity, I think it inspired us all because it's like you know brands that like don't know who they are. There was none of that. Authenticity was like at the core of this brand that I was working for and some of the brands that I had worked for previously too. It was just like they know exactly who they are. And are they going to change? Probably, but it's gonna be on their own terms, and it's going to be always foundational and rooted in the sports and the culture and the art form that got them there in the first place. So I think I learned that as like gospel from like day one. So, it's just one of those things that you're like, there's a ton of creativity, but there's also this very like, we know who we are kind of thing.
Well, a lot of these brands were founded by folks who came directly out of, the sport itself. So there was a commitment to authenticity, right? Right out of the gate. And others thought that it was formulaic, but if it didn't pass the smell test, brands would live and die overnight.
It's very true. Very true. I think, outsiders came in. They didn't make it a few times. Some of them finally chipped away and made it. But yeah, I think, it's one of those things. It's just paying dues. I think every industry of passionate people probably has their version of it, and skate and surf culture definitely had that. But it was one of those things though. I mean, I feel like skateboarding as a whole is like one of the most inclusive cultures ever. Like, I mean, the range of people and creativity and acceptance, and it doesn't matter what language you are, gender, skin color, anything like that, it's all in skateboarding. But the BS factor of like, don't come in and try to pretend you're something you're not, or don't come in and try to take something and just leave. So
Well, I think the most authentically born brands often become the greatest disruptors in their industry, right? I mean, here we sit in the Rivian, theater, one of the greatest disruptors in the EV space, while meaning probably the most authentic, right, to how they were founded. Blenders is another one of those brands in that space. So, what creative strategies did you bring to Blenders when you arrived? Because it's a very busy space. There's a lot of legacy brands involved, and you're coming out of the gate with a new product. How do you establish Blenders as a disruptor in that space?
sure, yeah. I mean, blenders, I mean, when I got there, I didn't found the brand, but I saw a lot of potential because they had already like, there were so many brands that had, say, been established, let's say in the 90s or even early 2000s, that kind of had this like, whether it's like traditional, like wholesale retail kind of formula where it's like you do it this way. Blenders had been founded in a space where it was completely direct to consumer, mostly born on social. So they had to kind of like shortcutted this way that all these other brands were still trying to figure out how do they adapt to a new world of e-commerce. So, they had already kind of set it up to like look at things from a different perspective. Then myself, I was sparked just to see, I was like, I see them trying to do something in this like this athlete space. I see them doing this fun outdoor, young, accessible to the public type of product. This isn't something that's unreachable. This is something that's for the people, and that very much got me sparked to say, okay, well, what can we do in there to, to continue that disruption, but something that I could lend my expertise to. So I think, it was really getting in there and working with a lot of their athletes and doing more kind of unexpected storytelling through their athletes, also just engaging their audiences, trying to amplify things not just through the brand channel, but through this collective group of this modern collective of athletes, which was huge for me. Yeah.
We're going to get a little bit more into the athletic, kind of, or the athletes associated with your brand in a little bit because they're significant force multipliers, really, and the way that you've been able to reach new audiences. But I want to get into the nuts and bolts just quite quickly of leadership in an ever-changing landscape, right? There's been a shift between how brands are communicating with their audiences, from kind of the big, glossy, traditional marketing to the use of athlete-driven content, which are really a space that you pioneered in. So how has your approach and your creative leadership really shifted to adapt or evolve to lead kind of what is the new creative marketing landscape?
Yeah, I've tried to be a student of all forms of creativity. So, I want like I said, like back my curiosity as a kid, like I want to be able to make something just with what's right in front of me, but I also want to know like how does 3D animation work, or how does, how can I do something with just the camera in my hand, but also like if I needed to scale up to like use a crew the size of, this audience here, like how might that work? How might that look? What idea dictates one or the other? So I think kind of being capable of doing all of those things, I think has given me the confidence to go in and say, okay, well, what does this need? And for Blender specifically, it needed a lot of it. It did need just sometimes a single guy with a camera. And sometimes it did need, national TV commercials. And sometimes it did need like, something like you're looking at here. We didn't have the product or the access to the athlete to do this huge campaign with Coach Prime Deion Sanders. So I was like, well, what can we do? We're going to completely 3D render and animate this whole idea in this story. So I think it's like you just throw everything at it. Yeah.
Well, perfect segue, Terry. Thank you. It's like we rehearsed this, but
Yeah.
so because shifting from people to technologies,
Yes.
right, and the adaptation, social media, AI, immersive experiences. How are all of those things, which can often be a challenge, but how are they shaping how brands like Blenders communicate with their audiences, quickly pivot and adapt, and take advantage of things such as that?
Sure. I mean, I know like AI is the hot topic, but for me, it really was like what I just was touching on was this, having either its limitations or a problem that you can kind of flip on its head and say, well, what can I do? So, I mean, um, 3D animation has been huge, I think, for certain projects. I wouldn't say every one, but like, when you have, like I was explaining, like lack of product or access to an athlete, or in this case, we had a brand partnership with Oracle Red Bull Racing, and it was like, I have this huge idea, but we only have access to Max Verstappen, the, race car driver for 20 minutes a year. This might not happen, but through technology, and you can bring an idea to life, a huge idea to where you're um, bringing a whole concept called Miami Mood to life, where you're, racing through downtown Miami, bringing your sunglasses to life. Let's put a giant pair of sunglasses on an island. Let's put them on the side of a building, things like that. I mean, that's stuff where you're like, literally any idea is possible.
So, can you walk me through the genesis of how this campaign came about? Where did the connection with Red Bull originate? How did it land on your desk? I mean, it must be quite daunting, right? You're taking the hottest driver in Formula One. He's won 2 championships. He's on his way to probably 4 or 5 by the time Blendes comes on board. It's a great amount of pressure to take on as a VP of creative for a brand like this. How did you approach it? How did it come about? And ultimately, what came to fruition?
Yeah, well, I have to give a shout out to Christian Scott, who was asked to do something with Red Bull, and he brought this deal, and so he landed this deal. And then from there, it's always like, okay, brand partnerships. Like, I've done brand partnerships with some huge entities like Disney, Star Wars, things like that. They all have their own rules, and you're like, okay, so how far can we really go here? And Red Bull was great. I mean, I think they gave us a very basic and general kind of set of assets. But then I was like, what about, is there this other lane that we can explore if we do it on the level of Red Bull, that we could just go nuts and do something for this Miami race? Because, I think there's a lot of excitement about this race, but there's like, I don't know, it just felt like it was going to fall short if it was just like you did a photo shoot at a race, or it just wasn't there. So, it was a lot of just communication with the Red Bull team just to say, "Hey, we've got this idea." Um, building trust too. By the point in time we did, Miami Mood, I'd built some trust and done chipped away at some small projects, got a little bit bigger, and then they trusted.
And did this happen to coincide with the inaugural Miami Grand Prix race?
This was the second one.
The second one.
So we kind of like we saw the like potential with how much like, I mean, that first one went off, and so we were like, let's go big for this next one.
So I want to stick with this for a minute because the central theme in your career has always been working with athletes, right? To bring the stories of the athlete in alignment with the storytelling of the brand. So, what's your approach from the onset to creating these compelling athlete driven campaigns that go beyond just the skill of the individual, right? But really integrate the individual into the brand while connecting with the audience?
Yeah, I think, I mean, going back, so earlier in my career is like being surrounded by this cast of characters. It was like they're all great at their respective sports, but like some of them just had like, you know, little quirks or little things or little interesting things that made you feel like you knew something that was interesting. I don't know. Like you see somebody on TV and you're like, yeah, they do that thing really well, but you're like, what's their favorite food? I don't know. Like there's just all these little things that are just like these ordinary things, and I think we have this underlying desire to like kind of get to know these people. So it was like, how can we do that in a visual brand format to where people are getting kind of like a backstage access to athletes. And sometimes that's just through how a single photo turns out, but sometimes it's in a short video. Sometimes it can be, over the span of all the work that they do with that brand. But I think I found that that stuff was really interesting. I think also being challenged by brands like Nixon to not show the action shot, but to show something else, add some level of art and insight to it, I think always just stuck with me. Also myself starting to pick up a camera more around, I was probably halfway through my career before I picked up a camera again to in a professional sense. And I think, um, for a photographer shooting a portrait, you always want it to feel like it was, I don't know, that that space was like, um, you know, intimate and real. And so I think I was always driven by that as a photographer, but then also trying to do that for the brand as well. Cause I felt like the closer the brand could feel to the person, the less it felt just like a pay to play type of scenario that they were together.
Now, some of the new creatives, right, in the audience, what does that process of discovery look like in getting to know the individual to find the essence of what makes them tick, right? So you can capture that great photo. What does that process look like? Is it a sit down on coffee, lunch? How do you get to know the athlete?
I think you got to do your homework. I think you got to know, like, you got to know some things for sure. Yeah, it's all the little things, knowing what might make them more comfortable, less comfortable, small talk, when to when to do this or that. I don't know. Yeah, it's just also just treating them with, like they're a human being. You have genuine curiosity about who they are, gaining their trust. Sometimes that trust is like, okay, well, I know who they are and I know what they can do. It's like, how can I let them know that what I do? And a lot of times it's just letting them in on the idea. Like, what's the idea? Helping them understand what the idea is so that they're on board, and then they then sometimes loosen up a little bit and kind of go with it. Yeah.
Any particular moment with an athlete stand out in your mind?
Yeah, no, I've had a lot of interesting moments. I think, some of the bigger personalities like, you know, are always interesting because sometimes they're not what you expect. Sometimes they're just completely normal people, who are much more reserved than they are on YouTube or TV or whatever they're doing.
What about particularly standout collaborations?
Standout collaborations. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Red Bull. Um, this one was pretty insane for blenders. So, um, you know, expanding out of, what would be traditional action sports was like something that was interesting. You talked about, how blenders might be different. I think the walls of like what would normally box another brand in to say like, hey, football, basketball, those types of things, that's not really us. Or is it? I think Blenders wasn't scared of that, and I think also just, like, catching the eye of somebody who's a true sunglass fan like Deion Sanders was, a bit of lightning in the bottle to be able to, come along some side of somebody, say, "We're gonna design a pair of sunglasses for you. You're doing big things in switching teams and going to take, um, a losing team and making them into something great." I think was just a kind of amazing partnership to come into. And then from a creative front, it was insane because it all came together so quickly. It was like, okay, we're designing sunglasses. We don't have samples except for the ones that we give to him. Then these sunglasses are dropping. Then, I mean, it just steamrolled into this giant thing to where before I knew it, Dwayne the Rock Johnson's wearing our sunglasses on college game day. We've sold a couple $1 million worth of sunglasses in one day on pre-order that weren't even ready to ship yet. So, and then our squad's like back to that slide with all of the 3D, TV commercial and all that stuff is like, okay, well, let's get after it.
So Coach Prime obviously has a very distinct brand, right, unto himself.
Yeah.
Could be known as an opinionated gentleman at the best of times. How much input did he have in the design of the sunglasses that were delivered?
He had a ton, but also I'm thankful too because they built this on one of the more popular frames that Blender's already had. So it is a frame that, the brand is known for. And then it was really just a matter of like making them him. So, I think that was actually one of the biggest blessings of all is because if he would have made his own thing truly his own thing, it might have been a one-sided collaboration, but instead it was something that Blender's brought and then he really made his own. And, the fact that I mean, you can spot these things from across a football field. They photograph amazing. We did some amazing things and hats off to the product team because they did it in super quick fashion. And I think that's another reason why this landed was because how quick the team is.
Now, looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of not just blenders, but maybe in the industry? Brand storytelling and creative marketing as it's moving with all the tools at its disposal today.
I think, gosh, I mean, that I get excited about the new stuff, but then I also get excited too about the things that never change. I look at the through line through my career has always been like things change, but I keep just rooting myself in sports, the athletes, the people, everyone's unique story, um, music, art, culture. Like, I think there's this genuine desire for people to want to progress and, get new tools and make things easier and do all these things. But at the same time, we all just want to be inspired by one another. And for me, it's been sport that has done that. So I'm excited by all the new ways I will get to storytell around sport and athletes. I don't know what a lot of those things are. I mean, if we would have asked 10 years ago what the subject would be today, and we were talking about, artificial intelligence and things like that, you probably would have looked at somebody a little sideways. So I don't know what's next, but I welcome it. And I've tried to stay on the pulse of everything as it comes and, you know, continue just to like stay young doing it.
Are there any specific sports or leagues, franchises that you would really love to explore next?
That's a great question. Sports and leagues I'd like to go next. I don't know that I have one in particular, although I did just recently shoot a parkour athlete, and I think that's
Oh, cool.
insane. I think that's kind of the closest thing that I could see. I mean, in this like hybrid between being like a skateboarder and a stuntman type of thing. I think it's inspiring. I think there's some really insane stuff you could do with like an FPV drone and a parkour athlete. It's already being done, but I think that's something I would like to be a part of.
Not doing.
No, I don't think so.
We're too old for that.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
So many of the students at LCAD aspire for roles in creative leadership after they graduate. Any words of advice of getting your foot into the industry or at least getting a foothold as they graduate and they start looking for careers?
Yeah, For me, it was a lot of networking. It was, um, you're gonna see a lot of faces in the crowd that you don't know. Try to get over that fear of, "I don't know that person." Just go and introduce yourself. Um, you don't have to be the best at everything. I mean, it's gonna take a while to master anything. So, just keep at it. Just keep putting in your time, putting in your work. Um, I think coming to things like this is beautiful. I think community is always going to have a power. You never know who you're going to meet in a community setting like this. I mean, that's like how I talked to a couple of people tonight about the trade show thing. It was like, that was a community that would just would help one another, So I think there's, now more than ever, it's like we're so connected, but we're also just kind of like sitting behind screens. So just get out and get in front of some real people. Keep, just I think there's so many avenues now to show your work too. So get your work out there. You guys are already doing it. I've seen all this work in the lobby and everything like this. Like, it's incredible. You guys are gonna be okay.
And you had mentioned very early that in your career, persistence was key to success. It was about the leave behinds and getting out there and just making contact with folks. Um, is that still today? Like, would you expect people to just kind of show up?
I think creative leave behinds are really great. Yeah. I think showing up, I mean, persistence for sure. And I would say most of the jobs that I really wanted, I thought I had at one point, and then it was like silence. And it was like, what happened? Oh, I didn't get it. And then I kept at it and then I got the job. So I think there's this like hang in there type of thing too, that it might have been the persistence that pushed it over the edge. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, I think leave behinds are huge. I remember my wife and I, when she was graduating college, making a leave behind, and we like made these seed packets to put with her resume to send out to people. And I remember she got a call back from, and this was like 1999, 2000, something like that. She got a call back from Bob Hurley just because of the seed packet. And he was like, "I don't have a job for you, but I'm going to help connect you with some people." And so, yeah, I mean, there's like what a seed packet does in an envelope for you. It's like, don't underestimate it.
Yeah, Nikki Scoggins once told us that someone sent her a birthday cake with his face on it, the guy that wanted the job. I think seed packets are a much better way to go, but
Yeah, and there was a whole like story too about like planting a seed and like, just it was it was good.
well, we're gonna wrap this up now. But Terry, thank you so much for coming out, and Wendy also for joining us here tonight. This story has just been. I'm really glad that I got to know you and learn more about the Blenders brand, but more about the connectivity between storytelling and the athlete, putting the brand into practice and then connecting the athlete with the audience. I mean, you can see the evolution through your entire career as to where it brought you today and, redefining what's possible. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come and share this with us at LCAD in Rivian here in Laguna Beach tonight.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.